Okay, so this will be a clarification and an additional topic so that you could understand further the last discussions that we have regarding the consumer preferences. Now, since we are going to deal with this consumers itself, no, the first thing that we have to take note is how consumer reacts or behaves in a certain market. Okay, so in here is we have discussed already what does consumer preferences means. And with the consumer preferences, the theory that actually explains how the people behave is what we call the consumer behavior. Okay, what is this consumer behavior? A consumer behavior entails us that how can a consumer with a limited income decide which goods and services to buy. So which means that with the income the people are receiving, with that limited or constrained income that they are having in their own hands, how do they allocate that to the different goods that they have to avail in the market? Okay, so in here, so how are we going to explain how the consumer behaves actually? That could be explained on three things so that we could derive which among the goods is best thing to purchase, what combination of the goods and services are the best one to purchase with our limited income. So we had already what we call the consumer preferences. This consumer preferences is the best thing because this explains us how we actually react. But with this theory itself in here, the next thing we have to take note is what do consumers do when it comes to their own behavior itself. Okay, so in here, we have to deal first with what is a market basket. Since people, or especially the consumers, are availing or are wanting different kinds of items or different kinds of goods itself, then therefore the combinations or the different kinds of good that they want, it's either a car, house, gadgets, okay, so etc and etc. So with these different kinds of goods that they are buying, this will now composes what we call our market basket. Because a market basket is a certain kind of a figurative term that shows us the different items that a certain consumer would want to avail. Okay, so of course, with this market basket that we have, it also includes there the different quantities. So how much car do they want? Do they prefer 3 units of car? Do they prefer three or two more houses? Do they prefer 5 kinds of gadgets? Okay, so it includes also there. It is included in our market basket, the quantities also that we would buy. Okay, now this market basket alongside with the different quantities that we would want, okay, alongside with these different quantities that we would want to buy, this will now composes what we call the bundle. What are the different bundle of goods that you would want? These are these things, okay, which with their own quantities itself. Okay, now this consumer preferences with the market basket has three assumptions. Actually, it has four, but the other one is already what they call this one very visible on the illustration that we are going to go further on. This market basket or the consumer preferences itself has three assumptions, which means preferences are complete, transitive, and more is better. When we say complete, that means what we selected that we want to buy with our own income is what we call our preferences, and that is completed already. Okay, and complete in the sense that along with all those the bundles that we have, we already rank them. Which one are we going to buy more and which one are we going to buy less? Okay, now when we say transitive on the other hand, is that transitive in the sense that we know which one gives us more satisfaction compared to the other. That means we have to be consistent when it comes to our choices. Let's say I prefer Mustang compared to Porsche, but I prefer Porsche compared to Ferrari. So that means comparing these two or three different products, I prefer this Mustang compared to the Ferrari. You cannot say that you prefer Ferrari compared to Porsche, which in fact, you know that you said that Porsche you prefer you prefer Porsche compared to the Ferrari. You cannot say you prefer Ferrari compared to Porsche, or you prefer Ferrari compared to the Mustang, because according to your rank already, the rank here, you prefer the Mustang compared to Porsche, Porsche compared to Ferrari. Okay, so you must be consistent. That's what consistent means when it comes to transitivity. Okay, and last thing is that we have here, of course, what we call more is better. When we say more is better, as a consumer, we, as much as possible, we have to buy a lot more and more, because it is better compared to less. Okay, so those are the three things that we have to take note when it comes to analyzing our consumer preferences. Okay, so let's proceed. Here, we had already mentioned the indifference curve itself, wherein the indifference curve is just a curve that shows us or explains to us the consumer behavior. Okay, it is a theory that explains the consumer behavior, wherein it is just a curve with the shape of like that, wherein it explains us the combination of the goods that we would like to buy. It's either the goods would be the Y or the X itself. Okay, so this indifference curve is what we call this one, just a simple way of showing us the level of satisfaction a person could avail. Okay, because through the indifference curve, you could see already there which group of goods has a higher satisfaction compared to the others. Okay, so let's see how does it work. So we have two examples. We have to continue the examples that we have last time. We have the food and we have the clothing. Okay, these are the different market basket that we would choose. It's either we would choose to buy market basket A, market basket B, D, E, G, and H. If you're going to prefer market basket A, these are the different combinations of market basket A. These are the different combinations of market basket B, and etc. Okay, so this is just, the table 3.1 is just an example of what we call a market basket, because it shows there the different food that we would want to buy, the different clothings with the different quantities or the different, yes, amount within those goods. Okay? Ganyan. So, if you're going to put that on a certain kind of an indifference curve, is that what I told you last time is like this. Okay? Now, we could graph market basket A here, the combination of 30 units of clothing with the 20 units of food itself. This one is the market basket A. Market basket B is the combination of 50 units of clothing with the 10 units of food, and etc. So this one is the market basket H, E, D, and G. Now, in order for us to come up with what we call an individual indifference curve, individual preferences, individual indifference curve, is you have to join the dots itself. But you cannot join the dots by doing like this. There is no such thing as indifference curve as like that, because you have to take note that by looking at this different market basket here, you could see, or you could just simply conclude that the market basket E is the highest one compared to this one in here. So therefore, if you're going to connect them, okay, in order for us to come up with a market basket individual preferences or indifference curve, is you have to connect the dot. So this market basket G could either one indifference curve. You could also get market H, A, and D as one market basket. You could get market basket B as one basket, or one indifference curve, I suppose to say. Please correct myself. And then market basket E could either be one indifference curve itself. So this one is indifference curve 1, indifference curve 2, indifference curve 3, indifference curve 4. So with all of this one, is you could already determine, or you could already conclude, that the market basket E here has the highest satisfaction because it is the highest among compared to the other. Okay, so that's how you get the, or how do you derive your individual preferences or the indifference curve. Okay, so how then are we going to decide? So when it comes to deciding, it's up to you which combination are you going to take. But given the different indifference curve, you will always choose the highest one, which is the point E here. Okay, but since what do you call this one? But since we have we have what we call this one, more is better, then which one are you going to prefer as a choices? Which you have a lot of choices in this one. So you could either choose this kind of indifference curve, okay? Wherein you prefer the combination B compared to combination A. You prefer combination A compared to combination D. That is transitivity. Okay, it's just for an example. So in this case, the indifference curve, this one connecting B, A, and D, could either be your indifference curve. So which will give you a utility of a satisfaction which could either be leveled to you as any value. Okay, so that's how you derive, or that's how you come up with your indifference curve already. Okay, so that you will have a better understanding compared to what we had last time. Now, combining all the different kinds of indifference curve as I connected them a while ago, this will now gives us the indifference map. Indifference map in the sense that it composes a lot, three or more different kinds of indifference curve. Wherein as a consumer, take note, you will always choose more is better, higher satisfaction. Okay, so therefore you will always choose indifference curve 3. But if your indifference curve or your preferences or your utility is already fixed at a certain level, you won, then you will only have to choose this one. No matter what indifference curve are presented in here, if your satisfaction is only up to this level, then you have to choose this kind of indifference curve. Okay, so there. Take note, Shira, take note. Indifference curve cannot intersect. They cannot. Okay, your satisfaction from this one cannot intersect to this one because you have a different level at market basket D and a different level at market basket B. So they can never intersect with one another. And it will always be downward sloping because of the sacrifice that we have to do, or we have to take. Okay, as I mentioned last time, that in order for us to obtain more of food, we have to sacrifice some part of the clothing. The same is true. If we want to obtain more of the clothing, then we have to sacrifice some part of your foods itself. So therefore, it will always be downward sloping because of the sacrifices or yung tinatawag nating trade-off. Okay? The trade-off. Okay, so that's how you deal with your indifference curves itself. Now let's proceed. We have here what we call the marginal rate of substitution. What I mentioned last time is the marginal rate of satisfaction. Now, what I am referring actually that time is the benefit supposedly a person could receive. So that you will not be misguided is that I have to correct myself in saying that MRS. MRS here is the marginal rate of substitution, not the marginal rate of satisfaction, because that one will refer to your benefit. It is simply as benefit itself. Okay? Now, what is the marginal rate of substitution here? It is what we call the amount of one good a consumer will give up to obtain more of the or another product. So we actually use this to measure your changes when it comes to obtaining one good. So how do we do this one? Let's proceed here. At first, you are going to have this kind of market basket, a combination of 16 clothings and a 1 unit of food. Market basket B is you have a 10 units of clothing and a 2 units of food itself. Now, at first, you prefer to buy this market basket A. Okay, you prefer to have this market basket A. But sooner or later, you feel that you want to eat more. You are craving more than what you are what you call this one, desiring more for the clothing itself. So you would like to obtain more of food. So you are going to change from point A going to point B itself. So in doing that, is that you have to sacrifice a portion of your clothing. And this is what you sacrifice from 16 to 10. So how much you did sacrifice is this 6 units. But how much did you obtain? This one unit of food only. So in this case, is that MRS here, MRS is considered to be the sacrifice divided by the gain. So that means, what is the MRS of food? MRS of food from point A, from market basket A to market basket B, that is 6 all over 1, which is simply, in simplification, 6. So that means, with this one, every time that you obtain 1 unit of food, every time that you obtain 1 unit of food, you have to sacrifice 6 units of clothing itself. Which means, by this one, you could already conclude that clothing is expensive, because with 1 unit only of food, you sacrifice 6 units of clothing. That's how expensive clothing is compared to food. Okay? And you could actually do that on the rest of the table itself, or on the rest of the graph itself. So from point B here, going to point D, if you are dealing with the MRS of food, from point B to point D, that is simply how much did you sacrifice? 4. How much did you gain is 1, simply 4. Okay, from D to E, same thing. So you can see that there is a constant amount that you are obtaining from food, and yet you are sacrificing also a lesser and lesser amount. Okay, so that's how you deal with your marginal rate of substitution. Is it also possible to obtain the marginal rate of substitution of clothing? Yes, of course. In the marginal rate of substitution of clothing, that is the sacrifice divided by gain. So that means, from point G going to point E, how much did you sacrifice is 1. How much clothing did you gain is 1 also. So the MRS from point G to E is 1. From point E going to D, how much did you sacrifice? That is 1. How much did you gain? 2. So we have 1 all over 2 as the MRS from point E to D. Okay, so which means that, in simplification, point 5, for every 1 unit of food, you have to only to sacrifice half unit of the clothing. Okay, so and so forth. That's how you deal with the marginal rate of substitution. So I have to correct myself on saying what is the MRS last time. So that is the marginal rate of substitution, which is considered to be the slope of the indifference curve. Slope in the sense that it is a theory, or it is a function that explains the changes that happens in the indifference curve. Okay, so that's how the MRS works itself. Now let's proceed to the other one. Okay, for the indifference curve, or for the functions or the maximum satisfaction a person could derive, that depends on the two kinds of goods. That depends on the good X, and that depends on the good Y. So that means the satisfaction that you could get from any kinds of good itself is, that depends on the function of it. So this is the function. So as you notice, this is the same with the demand function and the supply function, but it is just what we call this one, represented by the other kinds already of variable, because we are representing different kinds of the good itself. Okay, so that's how you derive it here. Here is the slope, which is considered to be the MRS. This one is the MRS. The amount of X, this one is the amount of the X good if the Y is not availed. Okay, this one, the y-intercept, the amount of X good. So for example, X is the clothing. How much is the amount of clothing that you could avail if you will not avail the other good na Y? Okay, so that's what the function means. So don't be misguided, please, because we are going to have a lot of functions sooner. Okay, so that's how the consumer preference work in terms of indifference curve. Now, please watch also the following video because this one will explain further the budget constraint to be corrected so that you will not also be misguided on how I actually did the discussion last time. Okay, so thank you for listening this one, and if you have further questions, please make a comment below, and we will discuss on how are we going to deal with this one, or how far did you understand the topic on the consumer behavior.